Hi, everybody, and welcome back. I hope you're enjoying day 2 of the conference so far. We still have a lot of interesting information to cover. Now, I'd like to introduce our moderator for the second plenary session of the Ex4OSH conference, a dear friend, colleague, and my former classmate, Dr. Faiyaz Bhojani, who is Business Health Leader of Global Manufacturing and Upstream Americas and Regional Health Manager of America's Shell Health. The second plenary session is titled Future of Work, Partnerships, Perspectives, Policy, and Practice. Faiyaz will introduce you to this outstanding panel of invited speakers, but also remember that there will be a live Q&A at the end, so send in your questions during the session, and just like yesterday, we'll have about 30 minutes to answer as many of your questions as we can. Faiyaz, the floor is yours.
Thank you, George, for the introduction. I'm happy to be here. Welcome, everyone, to the second plenary session. My name is Faiyaz Bhojani. I lead the health function of Royal Dutch Shell Group of companies in North and South America, and I'm also the conference co-chair. I have the privilege of moderating this session titled Future of Work, Partnerships, Perspectives, Policy, and Practice. This follows yesterday's session on research and training moderated by Dr. Lee Newman. Now, how people live and work has changed dramatically over the past decade, especially with the advent of technology such as smartphone, which keeps us connected personally and professionally 24/7. The COVID-19 pandemic disrupted our lives and accelerated changes in the ways we work. Workforces around the world went fully virtual, and business leaders scrambled to navigate the changes. Over the past few years, several trends in the future of work have emerged. These include a need to focus on the human experience rather than the proverbial employee experience, aligning organizational values and purpose with those of the employees and the community at large, building a sustainable, equitable, and compassionate virtual culture versus a unique organizational culture built at work on site, and offering staff flexibility in schedules and remote work, yet maintaining or enhancing productivity. All these changes and uncertainties are stretching the boundaries of traditional work and broadening the tent while highlighting the impact on the human organism, covering the dimensions of physical, mental, and social health, historically known as holistic health or total worker health. Never has the definition of health crafted by the World Health Organization 75 years ago taken a more central meaning than in the current environment. Interestingly, in 1943, 5 years before the World Health Organization enshrined its foundational definition of health, the visionary French philosopher and physician Georges Kungelham, in his book, The Normal and the Pathological, rejected the idea that there were normal or abnormal states of health. He saw health as the ability to adapt to one's environment. He emphasized that health is not a fixed entity, and it varies for every individual, depending on their circumstances. And further, he emphasized that health is not defined by the doctor, but by the person, according to his or her unique functional needs. He suggested that the role of the doctor be to help the individual adapt to their unique prevailing conditions. And so this takes us to the present. How the worker of today and tomorrow copes in this rapidly changing environment will require all of us, employer, employees, employee representative groups, policymakers, academicians, researchers to come together, collaborate, and partner to develop coherent policies, strategies, translational approaches, and tools anchored by data to support the worker and the organization, not just to survive this, but to thrive through this transition. This session has an outstanding cast of speakers to explore these dimensions from a diverse and inclusive perspective and offer practical tips and examples related to partnerships, policy, practice, and measurement tools. Let me introduce My speakers. Dr. Vic Strecker is a professor at the University of Michigan School of Public Health and founder of Kumanu, Inc. His latest neuroscience, behavioral, and epidemiologic research, including his 2 books and free open online course, Finding Purpose and Meaning in Life, are all focused on the importance of developing and maintaining a strong purpose in life. Adam Glauberg is the head of operations of Global Health Services for Johnson & Johnson. He is responsible for developing strategy and integrating the delivery of health and well-being services to 140,000 employees in more than 75 countries. This includes the provision of medical services through a network of more than 100 on-site medical clinics, employee assistance programs, wellness, health education and promotion, and occupational medicine. Dr. Ramya Chari is a policy researcher at the RAND Corporation. Her research focuses on environmental and social determinants of health and well-being. Dr. Chari currently is leading projects focused on developments of tools for measurement of worker well-being. Tools and performance indicators, I might say, that have been missing from our toolkit. And last but not the least, Chris Cain. Chris Trahan Cain is the Executive Director of CPWR, the Center for Construction Research and Training. Chris's goal is to reduce occupational death and disease among American construction workers. CPWR is a world leader in construction safety and health research and training and has been awarded a multi-year grant by the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health to deliver training and research programs for construction workers. Without further ado, please welcome Dr. Strecker to offer his opening comments. Thank you.
Faiyaz, thank you so much. And I'm really looking forward to this whole panel. I'm going to be talking about well-being in this new era of work. Before I do that, though, I just wanted to formally announce various conflicts of interest that I have. I've written 2 books, and I'll be talking about content from those books. I also have this company called Kumanu, and Kumanu is set up and designed to help employees and employers develop greater purpose in their work and greater purpose in their organizations. And I will be talking about some research that we've been doing and some interventions we've been building through that company, Kumanu. And one of the things I like to ask in the various talks that I give to employee benefits managers or HR managers or CEOs or other groups is, what's on your mind now? And what comes out almost invariably is all of these things, all of these words. People are really worried about anxiety and depression in their workforce, diversity, equity, and inclusion, talent retention especially. Of course, we're talking about that a lot. Emotional well-being, social determinants of health now, all of these things are just really coming to the forefront. And while COVID didn't create all of these, I think it poured gasoline on the fire of the gaps that already existed in well-being programming. So we'll get into that in just a second. But, you know, Amy Wisniewski is at the Yale School of Management. She's written a lot about this concept of purpose at work. And she says, especially now in this era of COVID, we don't necessarily have those coffee dates or meetings or the same kind of camaraderie. Often we're working at home, or even in our hybrid situations of working, we're often not connecting in the way we did. So we're kind of left with the work itself. And she asks this very existential question of, does my work matter? And, you know, ultimately, do I matter? Because so much of our purpose and direction in our lives, in our waking hours, comes from work. And so it is that important to us. So when we think about work right now and what's going on in our lives, Kumanu has a great relationship with the Harris Poll. So we've been conducting quarterly Harris Poll surveys out to over 2,000 people in nationally representative sample, and at minimum of 500 employees at every full-time employees at every survey. What we're finding now, and this comes from May of 2021 of this year, 60%, 6 out of 10 employees say they are somewhat to completely burned out. 40% of employees are suffering from moderate to severe depression. This comes from the PHQ-9, the Patient Health Questionnaire, which is 9 items, 40%. That is just remarkable, unbelievable, sad. 1 in 4 employees are planning to leave their work. And there are various surveys. I'm sure, you've seen some of these. Some say 1 in 3, some say 1 in 2. But it's just remarkable how many employees are not just thinking about leaving, but they're actually planning on leaving now, which is very, very scary. 1 in 2 employees, we like to ask people about their purpose and direction in their lives through fairly simple questions like, do you have a purpose and direction in your life? And a number of other questions using a very standardized scale that's been used a lot in the past, especially epidemiologically, following people for many years and finding that people with strong purpose after controlling for age, race, gender, income, education, health status, live significantly longer, far less likely to develop depression. They even make more money over a 10-year period. Lots of very positive things. Right now, in my academic research, we're looking at epigenetic clocks and purpose, finding that people with strong purpose in life have much stronger gene regulation of important genes. So we know that this is important, and we know that these people who have low purpose in their lives of full-time employees are 3 times more likely to be disengaged with their work. And we use a component of the Utrecht engagement scale here. This is an eye chart, almost meant to be an eye chart, I guess. It's a structural equation model looking at all of the data from the survey. And I'm going to now simplify the model. You don't have to read through all of this. And by the way, happy to share these slides if people want. But there's one very important outcome that I'm going to start with, and that is mental health. The absence or reduction in anxiety, reduction in depression, which we're just seeing skyrocketing right now, anxiety and depression, sleep disorders, et cetera. And one thing that we're finding, because in this survey, we're asking whether you have food insecurity and whether you have a housing insecurity or financial insecurity or childcare or elder care or transportation or communication insecurities. And what we find is fully 1/3 of full-time employees have either food or housing or financial insecurities, and they're very significant insecurities, asking questions like, have you run out of food in the past year and not had money to pay for more food? So these are really serious questions that we're asking of people. And what we found is that these social determinants of health are strongly negatively correlated with mental health. In other words, they're positively correlated with anxiety and positively correlated with depression. They're also negatively correlated with resilience, which is a big problem. So, and that we're using the brief resilience scale for you academic types. We also have found that people with stronger purpose in life indeed have stronger resilience. But very importantly, we're finding an even more important mediator factor in that, and that's that people with a strong purpose are able to regulate their emotions more effectively. They're able to kind of change their own emotional weather. If you've gotten cut off by a car driving to work, or if you feel like somebody dissed you, or if you're angry at a politician or media or whatever it is, can you flip your weather quickly? That degree of emotional regulation is strongly associated with having a strong purpose in life. And there's a lot of other research showing that. And that emotional self-regulation is related to greater resilience. We also know that people get a lot of their purpose in life through fulfillment of purpose in their work. That's why we work so hard very often. And even people, no matter what job title you have or what role you have, Amy Wisniewski, for example, with her colleague Jane Dutton, talk a lot about job crafting. So I can create purpose, I can craft purpose out of my job, almost no matter what kind of job it is. Just ask Mike Rowe, who has the TV series Dirty Jobs. We also know, though, that people with strong fulfillment of work, of purpose through their work and a strong purpose, those people are far more likely to be engaged and to remain in their work, to intend to stay in their job, what I would call retention intent. And we might call these factors of whether work helps you fulfill your purpose, your life purpose, your resilience, your emotional regulation. I like to call this personal determinants of health. And so we're talking about something that's going on in between your ears, these personal determinants of health, but we're also talking about something going on in your environment, these social determinants of health. And together, these things influence both talent management as well as mental health issues, both, two things that are really, really problematic at the moment. And we believe will continue to be an issue that we need to deal with, and hopefully deal with through a new generation of well-being kind of programs. We know that people who have high fulfillment of purpose through their work far more likely to be engaged. And you can see, this is just a dramatic difference in terms of compared to people with a weaker fulfillment of purpose through their work. Also, these people who have a stronger purpose fulfillment through their work, far more likely to intend to stay in their job over the next 2 years. So real important factors. In terms of interventions then, looking at this overall model, this really is a model, a conceptual model that helps us figure out what to intervene on. And as you might guess, these two major intervention points would be social determinants of health, SDOH type of interventions, as well as personal determinants of health. So at Kumanu, we've built a whole digital platform, and one element of the digital platform includes resourceful, and I'll get to that in a second, and the other includes purposeful, which is another element of our digital platform. So purposeful really is designed to help people manage their emotional self-regulation, to build greater purpose, to craft purpose out of their work, a whole host of things, bringing their best self to work on a regular basis. And we don't just use an app to do that. We actually do this through quite a few different channels, but an app certainly is one important tool that we use. So that's purposeful as an intervention. And I'm not here to pitch that or to explain it in any depth, but I just wanted to say that's a program that we have built overall at Kumanu. And then the other program we just recently released is called Resourceful. Think about a health risk assessment. Do you smoke? Do you drink too much? Do you eat right? Do you buckle your seatbelts, et cetera? In Resourceful, we can ask all of those questions. That's fine. But we also ask questions like, have you run out of food and not had money to pay for more? Are you worried about paying for your rent or mortgage? Are you having financial issues? Are you having childcare problems or elder care problems, et cetera? So we're really focusing on these social determinants of health primarily through Resourceful. And then we connect people to local resources. We work with this large not-for-profit called Aunt Bertha, which looks at very localized resources, and we connect them with those localized resources, as well as EAP and other employee benefits programs that are offered through their employer. So here what we have are both an intervention designed to address social determinants and an intervention designed to address personal determinants of health. So we think that this 1-2 punch is really going to be important. It's really trying to intervene in a more ecological approach, an ecological manner. So I will stop there. I just wanted to show you a little bit about what we're doing and what we're thinking about, how we're thinking about it. Certainly see other kinds of interventions and programs that we'll see down the road. But this emphasis on both of these issues, both the environmental issues, SDOH, as well as these more personal determinants, I think will be really important in this next generation of well-being programming. So I'm going to hand this off to Adam now, and I really am looking forward to his talk as well.
Thanks, Vic. I appreciate it. And today I actually think this is a great lead-in, Vic, because this is going to be a little bit about how J&J is living into some of the things that you discussed on your talk there. So, you know, I would say that now maybe more than ever, we recognize the value of health and the value of empowering our employees to live their best life in the need for J&J to live into our commitment to changing the trajectory of health for humanity. When we invest in the health of our employees, we know we unlock this deep potential that our folks have so they can drive performance across the organization. For us, we start by focusing on protecting our employees, right? Our employees need to have a safe place to come to work. We're free of fear of being injured or ill because of the workplace. But we have to go much beyond that. And that's what we're going to talk about today, this concept of going beyond that core basic element of protection. And then finally, we know that by investing in health and well-being, we're going to see that strengthening of our business results, whether it comes from better recruitment and retention of our employees, delivering on brand equity, or developing that potential that our employees have to impact the world. So here is how we define total health. I know there's a couple of models that use social in there. There's a number of other ones that are out there. For us, we focus on 4 key elements. Number 1, that physical well-being, starting from that protection all the way through healthy eating, physical activity and healthy movement, sleep. And then we go into mental. We're going to go into mental health a little bit and do a double click there. But obviously, mental well-being has been brought to the forefront over the past 2 years. And we'll talk about how we're approaching that, both from the perspective of keeping the well and looking at things like resiliency, all the way through to clinical interventions. We actually call out emotional. That is actually not always so easy to call out in the workplace, but it goes to things like we were talking about purpose and having purpose, an inclusive environment. Inclusion is a tremendously emotional feeling, and making sure people feel psychologically safe in our workplaces. And then finally, financial, starting from day one when you come into J&J, how can we help you meet your financial goals over time between day one and your retirement? And so we look at all 4 elements of well-being. You know, as the world changes, so does J&J and as the way we work, and we are looking at the different ways people are working today and really looking at how do we deliver to our employees given the changes in the ways people are working. And really, we're looking at 3 key elements here. The first one is the total experience. How do we seamlessly help people go between virtual and on-site experiences such that they don't feel disconnected? I think very often we say, here's an app you can use at home, and here's an experience you have when you're in your coworkers. How do we pull that through so it actually is one seamless experience? The second one is we really need an ecosystem. We have employees that work in all sorts of different environments. Our on-site superheroes come to the office every day, manufacturing and distributing our products. We have folks in labs. We have people working from home, working hybrid, sometimes in the office, sometimes not, out in the field with our customers. So we really need a full ecosystem so we can address the needs of the workforce. And I think the final piece, which is critical here, is listening to our employees. We need to gain those insights to understand what our employees need and bring those resources to them. So being employee-centric, I think all too often, especially in the wellness space, sometimes we come out with these programs that we think we want, as opposed to what our workforce is looking for and how we can help them in allowing our workforce to shape the tools that meet their needs the most. So as I said, we're going to do a quick double click on mental well-being. You know, the past 2 years has brought up really amplified the conversation around mental well-being. for us, and we're going to talk a little bit on all of our panels, I think, about assessment here. We really are focused on making sure we have a good understanding of the mental well-being needs of our workforce, looking at assessing both the clinical, using things like these validated scores like the PHQ-9 around what's the clinical needs and status of our workforce, as well as overall resiliency and things like purpose within that. There's some great examples of this. Japan has the stress check that's available. The UK HSE uses a pretty in-depth mental health risk assessment. And actually, just recently, came out with an ISO, the 43005 ISO standard, which has a management principle around mental well-being. And so we're looking at deep assessment organizationally and individually, and then bringing the right tools forward for our employees, for our leaders, to support them in their mental well-being. Again, going from keeping the well all the way through the right clinical interventions. So doing a deeper dive into one of our programs, I want to talk just a minute about Energy for Performance. So this is a 1, 2, or 2.5 day program based on the program that was built out of the Human Performance Institute out of Orlando. And so this program, looks at 4 key outcomes that we're focused on. Number 1 is managing and expanding our energy capacity. Human energy is what drives us all, and being able to have that capacity at its greatest amount is going to be what happens to have the biggest impact. We talked about purpose, so developing that personal mission, having the time, space, and coaching to do so is part of this course. Having rituals, having things that support your well-being every day on a regular cadence helps build that energy. And finally, that personal resilience. I'm proud to say that so far we've had over 100,000 of our employees take this 1, 2, or 2.5 day course. And as we talked about, assessment and understanding the impact is tremendously important. So we have looked at the impact of this both on a personal basis, but from a business perspective, what we found is that if you've taken one of these classes, we have higher retention. You're with us for more time. You're more likely to get a excellent rating, high rating in your next annual review. You're also more likely to be promoted. And finally, what we found is that it increases engagement across the organization. So where are we headed? We set 5-year goals, and we started back in 2010, just around, do people have access to the right tools? We went towards 2015 to 2020 around how do we engage people better, get more involved, get more engaged with the resources that are available. And now moving into 2025, we're really looking at the accountability of the organization and individual people leaders in building that healthy workforce. And what's the role of a leader in this space? So for us, we start with our vision. What's our vision? It's to have the world's healthiest workforce. That's our foundation. In order to do that, we want to enable this organizational competency in health and well-being. So we need to build a muscle in health and well-being across the organization. And you'll see here, although we talk about health and well-being, the achievement is around personal best. Our focus is helping our employees define and be their personal best as it comes to their health and well-being. We're focused in 3 key areas. First, physical well-being, our mental well-being, as we talked about, and we never lose sight of our commitment to employee health and protection in the workplace. And so as we move forward, we're going to be assessing each of our individual people leaders on their commitment and effectiveness in these areas. So what we'll be seeing as we move towards 2025 is I, as a people leader, will actually get an annual score. How am I doing? How are my employees rating me on this area? What's our compliance rates in some of these items? That's going to allow me as people leader and the other people leaders here at J&J to really take that commitment, bring it forward, and make it part of who we are as an organization. So we're excited for the next phase of how we work with J&J and our health and well-being. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Chari to take us to the next section.
Thank you, Adam and Victor. 2 really great, interesting presentations. So today I'm going to be talking about work that NIOSH, the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, and RAND conducted to define and measure this concept of well-being for NIOSH's Total Worker Health Program. And for those who might be unfamiliar with the program, Total Worker Health is a concept that was developed by NIOSH, and it's defined as policies, programs, and practices that integrate protection from work-related safety and health hazards with promotion of injury and illness prevention efforts to advance worker well-being. And so we know there's many reasons for why well-being is growing in importance. And for example, it's a stressful time in the workplace right now. Work is changing. There's less stability, there's more uncertainty, and this is due in part to a number of reasons, such as there's more short-term contract work with the gig economy, more temporary workers. There's also been job redesign and instability due to automation and a move towards the service and knowledge economy and away from manufacturing in the US. And loyalty between employers and employees has been decreasing, making retention an issue. And all of this was going on well before the COVID-19 pandemic, which has further disrupted workplaces. In addition, we now have this always-on culture. The separation between work and non-work has blurred due to technology like smartphones, which increase worker availability and access. And also there's different work arrangements like telecommuting or remote work, which has grown in acceptability. Next, we're also experiencing demographic transitions. And for instance, older adults are staying in the workplace, partly due to financial insecurities, or having two parents in the workforce brings work-family conflicts to the forefront. And finally, surveys report that younger adults place a high premium on well-being and work-life balance, and they're more likely to stay in jobs in which they can talk to their managers about non-work issues. So research shows that there is a business case to be made for investing in worker well-being. For instance, good physical well-being has an impact on reducing healthcare costs. Mental well-being has impacts on reducing absenteeism and increasing presenteeism rates. Positive work satisfaction indicators have impacts on increasing employee retention in organizations. And then well-being indicators have also been linked in the literature to increase productivity, performance, and engagement in organizations. So if well-being is so important and has all these positive benefits for workplaces, it really stands to reason that employers should develop policies to promote worker well-being. The problem is understanding what exactly is worker well-being. How would employees find out what their employees' well-being actually is? And then how would they go about improving it? And so answering these questions was the focus of the NIOSH Worker Well-being Project. So for workplaces to understand and improve worker well-being, we followed a simple three-step framework: define, measure, and act. And so first we asked, how should worker well-being be defined? Second, how should worker well-being be measured? And then finally, how can worker well-being measures improve workplace programs, policies, and practices? So first, to define well-being, we carried out a comprehensive literature review that focused on the concept, the definitions, and measurement of well-being. And what we found was in the literature that there are a lot of different terms to capture this idea of well-being as related to work. And you can see a sample of those terms in the word cloud that's on this slide. And it really runs the gamut from psychosocial to physical to emotional to functional. You can see words in there like happiness or enjoyment, which is indicative of well-being as this pleasant emotional state. But then there are also words like accomplishments or mastery, which is indicative of well-being as having meaning or purpose in life or work, as Victor talked about in his presentation. And so the common elements we found are that there is no one commonly accepted definition of well-being, that there are many models of well-being, and there's no consensus as to the components that make up well-being. So where we ended up was thinking about worker well-being as a collection of different indicators that each give you a different piece of information about worker well-being as a whole. So we thought about well-being in the same way that we might think about the weather or car performance. And so for instance, if I ask somebody, hey, how's the weather today? One person might say the weather is great. It's nice and warm today. Another person might say the weather is great. It's really sunny outside. And still another person might say the weather is good because the humidity is low. So there are a lot of ways to define weather. And really, our total picture of weather is looking across these multiple indicators. And importantly, individuals can also choose what aspects of the weather to focus on according to what is important to them. So similarly with car performance, we can look at different indicators such as oil or tire pressure, engine, battery, or fuel status. But the important point to take home here is that no one indicator on their own tells you how your vehicle is running, just like no one indicator can tell you everything you need to know about well-being. So keeping that in mind, on this slide, I present the worker well-being framework that we developed from our literature review, along with our worker well-being definition. And we ended up defining 5 domains for worker well-being: workplace physical environment and safety climate, workplace policies and culture, health status, work evaluation and experience, and home, community, and society, which are factors outside of work that can affect worker well-being. And our definition of well-being was as follows. Worker well-being is an integrative concept that characterizes quality of life with respect to an individual's health and work-related environmental, organizational, and psychosocial factors. It is the experience of positive perceptions and the presence of constructive conditions at work and in other areas of life that enables workers to thrive and achieve their full potential. So after defining well-being, to answer the second question our project posted and to develop a measurement tool for worker well-being, we carried out a number of tasks, which I discussed just very briefly here. We obtained input from an expert panel to help determine what a survey should include. We conducted cognitive interviews and pre-testing of a survey instrument. We field tested the survey instrument, and finally, we analyzed the data, refined and finalized the instrument, which we called the NIOSH WellBQ. And then we also developed scoring guidance. So this slide just shows the domains and the subdomains that are measured in the NIOSH WellBQ, and those areas that we felt research showed were important indicators of well-being. So for example, under the domain of workplace physical environment, there are measures of safety climate, work environment satisfaction, and interpersonal conflict and civility at work. Under workplace policies and culture, the NIOSH WellBQ has measures of supportive work culture, health culture at work, benefits, and organization of work and life. So things like work-life balance would fit under there. Under the domain of health status, we have measures of general health, physical health, mental health, health behavior, functional status, and injury. Under the domain of work evaluation and experience, the WellBQ has measures of worker satisfaction with the job and other aspects of work, measures of affect or emotional states at work, measures of meaning and purpose of one's work, employee assessment of support at work, measures of job engagement and evaluation of work conditions. And then finally, under this domain of home, community, and society, we have measures of overall life satisfaction, financial insecurity, social relationships, and activities outside of work. So just some quick notes about accessing and using the NIOSH WellBQ. The survey instrument takes about 15 to 20 minutes, I would say, to complete, and it includes 68 items. And on the slide is a link to where it is freely and publicly available. And again, we're happy to share these slides with anybody who would like them. So in this final part of my presentation, I'm just going to discuss some of the practical applications of the NIOSH WellBQ and then policy implications of worker well-being measurement. First, in terms of practical applications and in terms of who can complete the NIOSH WellBQ, it's really meant for workers across all industries and occupations, and it's suitable for various work arrangements, including full-time, part-time, seasonal, temporary, and independent contractors. There are multiple purposes for the NIOSH WellBQ or multiple ways organizations can use the instrument. It can be used to set benchmarks internal to an organization or workforce. Using those benchmarks, organizations could examine changes over time or assess the impact of interventions. And the NIOSH WellBQ could be used to compare results between groups within the same organization or workforce or across organizations and working populations. It's also important to note what the NIOSH WellBQ should not be used for. It should not be used to form any clinical judgments of worker well-being or to assume thresholds to signal actions for worker well-being. So finally, I just want to make a few points about the policy context for well-being. And first, I want to point out that well-being is kind of a new but rapidly growing area. And in terms of policies, given this focus on well-being is relatively new, what we aren't seeing yet are a lot of practical guidance for implementing policies or programs based on well-being measurements in the workforce. And this might change in the years to come as tools like the NIOSH WellBeQ are used and data amassed and lessons are generated about its implementation in different workplace settings. What we are seeing now, though, are a lot of calls to consider or incorporate well-being as an important indicator on par with traditional ways we might measure or evaluate organization performance, such as using economic or performance or productivity indicators. So it seems the policy focus now is on raising awareness about well-being and its importance, socializing the concept, and then trying to change the culture to move towards acceptance of well-being as a critical measure to track in its own right. Second, I wanted to point out that organizations can take lessons learned from national and local government well-being efforts. And so this movement on well-being in the workplace really parallels what we're seeing in national and international contexts on much broader scales. And so, for example, the Gross National Happiness Index is a tool used by the government of Bhutan to assess the happiness state of its citizens over time, and also to guide decisions about areas to invest in to increase happiness. In the US, in Santa Monica, California, they developed the Santa Monica Wellbeing Index, which has similar goals to the Gross National Happiness Index, which is to measure well-being in Santa Monica residents. And the image on this slide shows the domains and example measures that Santa Monica uses to define and measure well-being. And they combine these survey measures with data that is already collected by the city, such as crime rates or economic indicators, and they use it to identify populations or areas in which well-being performance is not as good relative to other populations or areas, and then also to inform actions about investments for where to improve. So similarly, organizations or workplaces could use tools like the NIOSH WellBeQ to complement existing data collection efforts on things, like absenteeism, for example, and then to perform a checkup of sorts and measure the pulse of the workforce when it comes to well-being. And so a final point I make here is that efforts today, like the NIOSH WellBeQ and other similar efforts to measure well-being, are really the starting point of beginning a larger policy conversation about integrating well-being into organizational decision-making and improving it in workers. And without measurement, I feel there's no foundation to move to actions. And so I note as well that these conversations shouldn't just happen at higher organizational or governmental levels, but within organizations and between workers and management. As I discussed earlier, there's no one right way to interpret the well-being scores in a single measure or scale, and there are no thresholds to know that actions are needed. And just like the weather, where certain indicators might be more important to a person than others, the same with employees and organizations and the different well-being indicators that are used in a tool like the NIOSH WellBeQ. And so these tools can be used to open up and to start conversations about what is important to an organization or a workforce. And these conversations could also be the beginning of developing policies and interventions around well-being. And so finally, just some acknowledgements of the project team and supporters, and we look forward to answering any questions.
I am approaching this discussion from a little bit different angle. When we talked about what this panel was about, one thing that was really important to me and I wrote down was, how can the system support both the worker and the organization? So in thinking about that, as we hear people talking about moving towards a gig economy and what is the future of work in the context of a gig economy, I wanted to share the experience of the union construction model that addresses some of these issues, supporting workers and supporting organizations, not just of the union, but of the employer that employs the workers and the owner who contracts with contractors to do construction work. So one of the things that is the foundation of the union model in construction is apprenticeship. And registered apprenticeship in the United States is pretty well defined. And I wanted to go over a little bit about the history of it, the scope of union apprenticeship in the US, and generally how it works and what it leads to. What do the construction unions do to support the workers in the industry? So the history goes back to the Middle Ages, based on peer training, where one person passed their skills on to another person or their apprentice on their way to becoming a journeyman or a craftsman, who has high skills that are transferable and are portable from employer to employer and from job to job. Another thing that's really interesting about the apprenticeship system and the unionized construction system is that the functional leadership is really from the workers. When we think about the way many employers view their leadership in their organizations and their companies, it's from the CEO suite down and through really well-developed and well-defined management of the organization. When you think about the skilled construction craft worker, and in the union sector in particular, the work is passed from one worker to another. The workers are assigned to different employers through a joint labor management fund that's typically led by people out of the union. And it's a really different kind of functional way to look at work than in, say, a static industrial facility. The apprenticeship scope in the United States is very, very broad, and I think it's a really well-kept secret. There are over 80 apprenticeable crafts. These are different professions and registered apprentice programs where workers travel through their apprenticeship and then graduate to a journey worker status in one of these crafts. This occurs in the US through about 15 large national unions that have these different crafts as part of their union. The model of apprenticeship is earn while you learn. When a worker becomes an apprentice in the unionized construction sector, they start on the job right away, but also in school. So their time is split depending upon the union and the local system. They may be going to school at night and working on a construction site during the day under the mentorship of a journey level worker. Or some apprenticeship programs have you work on the job site one week and you're in class the next week. This training occurs at over 1,600 training centers around the country. And the length of the apprenticeship is 3 to 5 years. And some of the more what we call basic crafts are the shorter duration, but when you get into the heavy mechanical and licensed crafts like electricians and pipe fitters, some of those are 5 years in length. We see a lot of vets coming into the union apprenticeship system, not only because sometimes they have a leg up in entering the system because they've already demonstrated that they are great workers, but they also are able to qualify under the GI Bill to support that. The union apprenticeship joint labor management systems invest almost $2 billion a year in these systems. These are through, as I said, joint labor management funds that are collectively managed to run the apprenticeship program through negotiated funding through the collective bargaining agreement. So it comes out of the pockets of the workers is instead of wages to run these apprenticeship programs and to fund them. The benefits is the construction careers. We call them 15 trades. These are international unions depicted on the screen. The benefits to the workers are lifetime skills. The skills stay with those workers through their life, and they learn them through the apprenticeship, and they're transferable across different employers. Middle-class wages are common in the construction trades. We see average salaries of journey workers coming out of the apprenticeship without overtime close to six figures. The other benefit, because these are agreements between employers and the union, there's benefits involved, and these benefits are portable across employers. A worker may be dispatched from the union hall to multiple employers in any given year or for different amounts of time, but the benefits are paid through another joint labor management system that provides health and welfare, provides health insurance, provides retirement and other benefits that go with the worker from employer to employer. So this model, I think, is appropriate for any gig economy. Construction is the original gig economy, and it is proven to work and support people throughout their careers by providing high level of skills and a continuous level of support from apprenticeship to retirement. And with that, I will wrap up, and thank you.
Thank you all. What I was thinking about, if you want to offer at least a question that you would like to ask our panel members that may actually highlight some points that you did not deliberately expand on in your conversation. What do you all think?
Well, if I were to try to frame this up, I would say that Adam and I have focused a lot of attention on actual interventions.
Yeah.
Ramya has focused, and Chris referred to this well-being survey. So I think she's focused on assessment right now. I think, Chris, in a bigger, deeper, more ecological sense, you're essentially referring to unionization as a route toward well-being in a way, which to me I find really intriguing. And but maybe you disagree, but I think that's it's trying to build some connections and themes from what you were saying into the well-being theme of this.
I think, well, it's also the future of work, right? Thinking about how we think about the future. And when you're a construction worker, you're not working remotely, like
right.
all of my staff is right now.
Right.
You're actually working. You continue to work through difficult times. But I think that the kind of theme is the fact that there's that may kind of go with what you said, is that there are supports provided to the construction workers through their health and welfare fund, that joint labor management fund that provides health insurance and retirement, deferred wages for retirement. So unlike other gig workers who are maybe technology-based platform gig workers, there's an infrastructure that of the health and welfare fund that follows the workers through their career, as long as they're working a certain number of hours in the union construction industry each year. So their EAPs are just standard EAPs. When you think about the mental health and wellness, which we're really engaged in here at CPWR, there's not a lot of confidence in the EAPs provided through most of the health plans, but there's actually a growing network of peer support workers in the mental health and substance use disorder space that are filling those gaps.
Well, Chris, you
terrible mental health and substance use problems in our industry. So many workers dying.
But you bring up a broader, really interesting point, which is the portability of well-being across employers, across infrastructure, across life, right? Like how do we support, and this is where, you get the policy and NIOSH and thinking about how do we make well-being much more portable to the individual.
I was thinking exactly the same thing.
that we can frame a question, and it can go to all actually, which is, when we talk about future of work, a lot of emphasis is on the future gig workers, virtual workers, etc. But we always forget that there's always going to be a part of our economy that's going to be based on the traditional worker who is going to be at the site, at the coalface all the time, right? And Adam, that's a nice way to put it. What is the portability of this for not only the employers, but even within the same employer, you will have a number of people, just like in my organization, who are at the coalface every single day. And then there is another large chunk of people who are just working virtually. Yeah. And how does the employer sort of, pull the two together? But also the broader question of are there any, will there be any differences of how we approach the whole concept of well-being? What do you all think?
I think that's great, but what we don't have in the gig economy, the new gig economy, is any kind of corporate responsibility that has been demonstrated by people in this group, right? The Johnson & Johnson feels a great, has a social contract with its workforce, right? And not written out as a social contract, but you feel that you have a social contract with your workforce and your workforce's well-being. And Victor, you work for clients who obviously believe they have that same social contract. But where I think what I'm worried about is where the new gig economy is pushing workers to the point where they have no social contract with anything through their work. So where that loss is really it's technology driven, but it's also driven by corporations who are driving that type of economy. So how do you then substitute the social contract that companies like Johnson & Johnson have with their workforce to those whose employers disown them as workers?
Right.
And I think the model that the union construction has is one way to do it, is to have some association of workers who work in the new gig economy where they can obtain and earn credits in a health and welfare system so that they have health insurance and so that they have an EAP, even if it's not great, and so that they have deferred wages to actually not be destitute in retirement, right?
Right.
Does address the equity issue if you look at it from that perspective.
Yeah, I mean, the equity issue would be huge for just, you just think about the benefits associated with traditional employment that are absolutely absent from the new gig economy. I mean, if an Uber driver could collect credits for every ride that they gave into some kind of system that would provide them with health and welfare, that would be a type of assist. I don't know. I'm just kind of.
Oh, this is fantastic. This is fantastic because without giving questions, our conversation is very easy to lead to make the questions, and then free flow from. And these are the challenges, that we need to keep an eye on.
Yeah, the inequities in our system, as anybody who's been awake for the last 10 years could attest to, have been splitting off further and further. And I think anyone trying to predict the future, it would make perfect sense to say that's going to continue to split further and further with service and construction and other things, gig economy workers. So I think looking at solutions that are associated with well-being and unionization and that union approach might be one, there might be some others. And I'd be really interested in maybe for next year, there could be a really fascinating discussion about different ways people are thinking about doing this and providing well-being to people who are increasingly being bifurcated off by the haves, by the people who are have these kind of benefits.
Yeah, a classic example I'll just share. With the 80,000 folks in Shell, we have about 30-ish thousand people who work at the front line. Yeah, they're always present at work. They have to be present at work. So when we develop any programs in the health well-being area, we have to address those two groups of people, of 50-ish thousand here and a 30,000, because these people who are working at the front line don't go and sit in front of their computer most of the day. And most of our programs that we initially develop are online. So we need to figure out how we are going to take that 30 minutes or 45 minutes or 60 minutes of this person's time who is spending their 8, 9, or 10 hours at the front line and then work with that. Yeah, that's a very critical challenge that we always face. And we haven't found a good answer for that yet. Yeah.
Are they unionized, Faiyaz?
Some of them are unionized and some of them are not.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. The one thing our data has found through the Harris poll very clearly is people who have various financial insecurities are 2 to 3 times more likely to be suffering from depression, anxiety, to have all sorts of other associated problems, as Chris was referring to. So, yeah, it's figuring out new solutions and returning to some others.
I was just looking for a slide that I use sometimes, and it shows this really kind of similar concept in the size of employers in the construction industry and the fatality experience, the rate of workers who are killed by traumatic injuries. And it's just stunning that the smallest of the smalls experience such a higher rate than the large. And there's kind of this theory that's going around, even when I talk to the largest of the large firms in the industry, are they our subs? Because they know they contract out the riskiest work to unsophisticated employers. So, that kind of also parallels in the gig economy, right? Is Amazon's creating their Amazon little corporations that are limited to no more than, I think 50 employees. We're gonna, is it 100 or 50?
I think it's 50.
Yeah, so we're gonna set you up with the technology and the loans for the trucks and everything, but you can't hire more than 50 people. And in construction, if you don't have more than 50 people on payroll, you don't have a safety person, you're not paying attention to safety, you're just trying to survive. So you've got these kind of large level corporations doing this on purpose. And that's like another big problem.
I do think that, in order to solve problems like this, it requires, associations, employers, government agencies, policymakers to all come together, because no one group can solve for an entire economy that's shifting, right? And so I think that, it's conferences like this and things we're doing that pull people together to say, how do we start thinking about this differently? Because we all have a vested interest, right? So, Vic, to your point, if you've got a whole population that has a higher incidence of depression and anxiety, and they're less productive and a drain on the healthcare systems, well, that's no good for anybody, regardless of how large an employer
Exactly.
is, right?
Yeah. Yeah. We can't continue that way.
Yeah. So, we always think that we can bring voluntarily and happily all the stakeholders together. Many times that doesn't happen, right? I'm sure, Adam, you see this all the time, and all of you have seen this. When I look at our folks who work in Germany and Netherlands and, that part of Europe, where they have much stringent government policies, much stringent employer representative organization, they have certain things afforded to them by no choice of the employer, right? And when you compare the same thing to, for example, say US, we don't have exactly the same boundaries. And so there are inequities that are created just by that. And as you know well, all of you, that, in Europe, there is a lot more interest and availability, etc., in this space that we are talking about than in some other parts of the world, including here.
Actually, I use the term social contract. And early in my career, I was representing the building trades unions at a meeting in Europe with the European unions and OSHA and the employer counterparts, this tripartite meeting that we used to have. And the way I was learning from these European trade unionists, and they're like, it's part of the social contract that countries have with their citizens. And I'm like, we don't have that in America, So this idea of a social contract is this kind of European assumption that doesn't exist in this country because we're so different. So, where does the contract with our citizens come from?
Well, health is a basic necessity in that part of Europe, right? So that's part of their contract. They have a national health service, and then they build everything upon it or around it. We start with the absence of a national health service or something like that could act as, I'm not talking about the pros and cons of it, but there is something, and clearly health for many, many, decades has not been considered a fundamental right here. And in many other countries for that reason.
That's right. That's right.
Interesting conversation. Are we kind of wrapping up? I just wanted to check. I've got.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
1 o'clock meeting.
Can we get?
Ramya, I want to give you some time. I know you may have been thinking of saying something, but holding off.
Yeah, well, because it's kind of a related topic, but when you were talking about the social contract, like something that's always been interesting to me is thinking about how far out this social contract in a way between organizations and workers go, especially when we think about this blurring lines between work and non-work. And this, I can see if we don't really think through it, would be a major policy challenge and for well-being in terms of what organizations are responsible for, how much they can be responsible for in terms of well-being for the sorts of issues that happen outside of work, but of course people bring those issues into work. And so it's with this new way of thinking about things, it was much easier to sort of think of work as this separate place that people go to, and we're just going to deal with the issues that happen there. And then you can kind of define your policies and implement them in that way. But now, people are not seeing that in the same way, right? And in some ways, I think people are expecting a lot more from their workplaces, to the point of wanting work to be involved in communities and, and having that kind of bigger sort of contract going on. And so that's just an issue I think would be a bigger challenge as we move forward, and is trying to understand where those lines might be in something that doesn't actually have lines, right? We'd have to draw them in some fashion and justify that.
Yeah, no, that's good. So one of the other things I was thinking, just because of recent events, we talk about policy, like policy comes out very quickly from somewhere, right? It almost never comes out quickly. It takes, decades and decades. And in our current environment in US, we just look at the recent event of OSHA trying to come up with an emergency temporary standard on COVID, right? I don't know where it's ever going to go or it will ever fly anywhere, yeah? But it's amazing that something that maybe a large percentage of people think would be of help to individuals, families, economy, etc., takes such an interesting route because of the way our country is today. I wonder, well-being, because, larger employers, as we all said, see the value in it a whole lot more now. But larger employers don't comprise 80% of the employers. They comprise 30-40% of the employers. So there's a half of the chunk or more that are mid-size or small employers.
All right. Well, thank you all for sharing your experiences and insights. I think both your presentations and the conversations were very enlightening. So I have several questions online, and because we touched broadly on the concepts here with some examples, let's start with a practice question. So the question is around And actually, we're going to ask Chacha to address this first. By the way, she has graciously agreed to step up for Dr. Ramya Chari, who had to leave because of another engagement. So the question is that how do the occupational health practitioners or practitioners in general health and well-being apply the total worker health survey and instruments that you and your team have designed, developed, and deployed? Yeah. And then there are some specific questions around, are they ready to go for practitioners? And what are the challenges that you've seen? And I'm going to add one more that came just a few minutes ago, which is around the content of the survey questionnaire. And the question is, why don't you include job demands and controls and actions of employers, which go directly to what Chris was saying around corporate responsibility? Yeah, or do you? So, Chacha, kick us off.
Yeah, thank you. Before I forget, I do think that question was not addressed at us, because that question, the instrument does cover job control and job demand. First of all, Dr. Chari sends her regrets for not being able to stay for the Q&A. We think the instrument is ready for use by practitioners. It could be used, it could be deployed to help understand workers' perceptions, the workplace policies and practices, and the impact on the worker well-being, and identify opportunities for designing healthy work and jobs that are supportive of worker safety and health. It is ready to go. It is on our website. We do hope that we can have an electronic version, such as a Qualtrics code, available. And our Colorado Center of Excellence is working on a Spanish translation, so that's very exciting. We do want to have more work done on it. With more work, I saw another question there about, small businesses, or we've talked a lot today about the gig economy. We would love to be able to have more data, and with data, then we can have benchmarking information. It's a brand new instrument, so there's no data about it. But with more data, such as data warehouse or data repository, then we could do further validation. We could create summative scores for the domains for an overall score. And of course, it needs to be deployed widely in different size employers and different populations and in non-standard work arrangements. And we are exploring how to do that. We're seeing what kind of partnerships we can develop and what kind of long-term planning is available to be able to do more research and collect more data about this. If you have ideas for that, please do let us know. But I want to finish up with one more thing about deploying this by practitioners. We just developed the instrument. We're not involved in actually implementing it, but we definitely recommend that you have, typical best practices for instruments, such as having an interdisciplinary participatory group to help plan the use, have labor, HR, workers, management at all levels at the table to plan this. Make sure it's voluntary, make sure you protect people's privacy, make sure you have a plan for what you're going to do with this information. People don't want to give feedback without knowing that you're going to do something with this, something useful, instead of it's just wasting their time, and probably have a plan for reporting back to workers the results, so that people again are getting feedback on the information they provided.
Thank you, Chacha. Adam, perhaps you can share what J&J does, or what you're all doing in terms of data, and what sort of data do you collect and how do you apply it? And then we'll open it up for all.
Yeah, thank you. So very similar to what Chacha was talking about is we do a cross-functional group that looks at a health risk assessment, very similar to the NIOSH tool, looking across domains to see where our employees are from a well-being perspective, what is impacting them on a workplace perspective, and then we've got another set of tools. We pull data into a data lake and are able to parse data between our workplace information, things like retention and recruitment and performance, absenteeism, along aside to all of our programming. So we're able to start looking at all of those items. I think our long-term goal is this model where, and we're starting to see this come into play, where we do these assessments, we're actually starting to put the corrective and preventative actions that come from these well-being assessments into the same management systems we use for safety, that we use, for business management. So health is no longer working outside of the way we run our business. It's actually embedded in our management systems. And we think that's the best practice. It's something that we want to do more of, but it's really a model for pulling together all the different disciplines.
Great. Any additional thoughts, Vic or Chris?
Well, I just throw out there that we're getting ready or in the process of fielding the instrument in the construction industry to see how it works, just learn from it. So we're looking forward to seeing the results of that.
Okay, well, let's move on to the next one. And that's around, over 2,000 years ago, Aristotle was teaching us that each man's life has a purpose and that the function of one's life was to attain its purpose. Further, he said that this purpose should lead to earthly happiness and flourishing. Yeah. So, Vic, what's new in the last 2,300 years?
Yeah, well, actually, now there's a science to the purpose. One thing Aristotle differentiated were what he called eudaimonic values and well-being versus hedonic values and well-being. And we're all familiar with hedonism, which, is good food and good wine and good, whatever. And that's fine. And Aristotle said, we all have that, no problem. But if that's all we have, we are like, and I'll quote him from Nicomachean Ethics, we're like grazing animals. And while we all like to graze, he said that there's something bigger than that. And eudaimonic, the root word is daemon, which means inner God or true God or inner self. That is your authentic self that lives within you, that you're born with. By the way, the Hindus believe this as well. Buddhists believe this as well. They call it the Atman. So you're born with that. And that's a really, really interesting perspective. But now there's been a lot of research on that. So literally there is research looking at gene expression, differential gene expression by largely hedonic people, hedonically purposeful. I want, a trophy spouse, and I want a Maserati, and I want all these things, versus eudaimonic, which is more transcending or self-transcending. And people who have more eudaimonic well-being have more antiviral cells produced, proteins produced, and more antibodies produced, more type 1 interferon produced. People with more hedonic well-being have more pro-inflammatory cells produced. So you can see the difference and how that might be relevant in a pandemic, for example. We have a brand new paper that's going to be coming out looking at what are called, you might be familiar with epigenetic clocks. These are clocks, biological clocks, looking at patterns of gene expression, patterns of what's called methylation, and finding that people with stronger purpose actually do have longer epigenetic clocks. And that turns out to be a much more important predictor than something like age. It's much more important predictor than mortality is. I guess getting back to the workplace, though, I think that anybody, and if you ever watched Mike Rowe's Dirty Jobs program, anybody can have a purpose. Classically, in 1962, John F. Kennedy comes up to a custodian and says, "Hi, I'm President Kennedy. What do you do?" And he said, "Well, Mr. President, I'm helping put a man on the moon." And with that type, what's called job crafting, the concept of finding purpose through your work, which can be done with anybody. I've done it recently with people who were emptying our septic tank. So I believe that anybody can find purpose and meaning through their work. And that turns out, since that's most of our waking hours, to be a super important construct and part of our overall life purpose, with which Aristotle, then moving to Viktor Frankl, moving to Jean-Paul Sartre, I could go on and on, have all talked about the critical need to have purpose and direction in one's life. And, I could go on much longer than that about the health effects of this. So we believe that well-being is really rooted in purpose and being able to find purpose. And if you do work, being able to find purpose through your work.
Excellent.
Can I add one thing? I fully agree with that. I was looking at the chat and someone had talked about sort of, the burn and the burn on the workers versus the workplace. The ILO, the International Labor Organization, has this great statement: decent work sums up the aspirations of people and their working lives. And ILO goes to say, what does decent work mean? It includes having a fair income, security in the workplace, social protections for families, which not all people have in certain systems, better prospects for personal development and social integration, freedom for people to express their concerns and organize and participate in decisions that affect their lives. So I think our vision is that work can be a recognized means of achieving well-being. Just like Vic said, work can give you meaning, purpose, and presumably, hopefully, also good financial security, and you feel valued. So there's potential for that. There was a futurist once who had predicted that in the future, all work will be meaningful, that the less rewarding work will be, sort of automated or something. And that would be a great vision. But we do make sure we need to make sure that we're not just sort of telling people they need to, put their mind to it and get over the fact that they're not being paid enough money and they need to work 3 jobs.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah.
Well, we
thanks
recently
for taking us to 2,300 years, right? In 23 seconds. So that's fantastic. I do want to move on because there are several questions, and this question relates to policy. So perhaps Chris can kick it off. It says that in terms of gig economy workers, the virtual health benefit program, what do we see here in the US and perhaps a little bit around the world? Because we know EU is doing something in a much accelerated fashion there. What are we doing here in US in terms of policies? What's going on, Chris, and then everybody else?
Well, I saw the questions and some of the ideas that came through the chat as well, and they're very intriguing. I feel that, we probably are a long way from having regulation or our federal government require such a thing as some of the things mentioned in the chat of, contributing your work hours collectively to your health fund outside of some kind of the model I described, which is non-federally involved contract between workers and many employers. So I just don't feel like we're really there yet. I think we have a different viewpoint in America where it's very rugged individualism is kind of like at the base of our being, which is not collective healthcare. And we've gotten as close as I think we're going to get in my generation with Obamacare. So there have to be other ways, though, and I'm really interested in exploring them with smart people like are on this discussion right now.
Great. Well, I must admit that time flies when we are having fun. We are about 2 minutes before the end of the session, and I couldn't believe it. So I'll give you all 30 seconds each to say, what are the key learnings that you got from this session from all of us, and what any parting words would you have for our participants?
Well, I'll just wrap up really quick. When we had that discussion after our presentations, we weren't planning, that wasn't planned, and we didn't do it to share with this conference, but afterwards we all agreed to. So I found it really fascinating and interesting and full of some differing viewpoints and discussions. And I think that's the type of thing that we want to see in conferences. And we want to have some discourse in respectful ways to kind of explore how to fix the problems we have with the health of our workers and the well-being of our workers in this country. So I'll wrap up with that.
Thanks, Chris. Adam?
Yeah, I'll say two things. Number one, I love how we are leaning into putting science and data behind some of our efforts, and I think it's going to be a key driver for the future. And then the second thing is the value of partnerships, private-public partnerships, and what that will mean in lieu of regulation. Sometimes can bring huge value, and I'm excited to see where that goes as well.
Thank you, Chacha.
I'm inspired. I really like the different ideas and discussions, and I love, Vic's points about meaning and purpose. So it's making me feel a little hopeful about the different possibilities and systems, and could share the apprenticeship approach. I think, and then Adam has different approaches at Johnson & Johnson. So I am feeling hopeful about the possibilities and innovations out there, and the commitment that everyone has to worker well-being.
Thank you. So I'm equally inspired. Thank you all again. And, this is the beginning of the conversation. Vic, I know that they will cut us off before we leave. So there you go. It's your time between now and the end.
Well, what I did like is that we were trying to deal with root cause issues, that there's root causes in between your ears, like mindset. And that's why we might talk about purpose and direction, dignity, belonging. But also there is a root cause outside of that, which are social determinants of health. There's policy issues that are relevant to this. And I enjoyed the fact that we talked about multiple layers, but we're all trying to focus on those root causes.
Thank you. And that's the last words from Vic. Once again, thank you all. And I believe that as we move forward, we will have many, many more conversations that will go into the details and practicality of it, and how we can support in partnership both the employees and the employers achieve what we need to achieve in the area of health and well-being in our future of work. So thank you all, and have a good afternoon, evening, morning. Bye-bye.